trying to figure out who they're meant to be and how to do it. They've got a profound sense of ethical questioning and tension, and they're pushing boundaries. And if no one guides them, they try and self-initiate, and it's often chaotic and filled with regret. So it's no wonder then you've got people absolutely. And then on top of that, now what we're dealing with is we say to people, there is no path. You get to invent and be whoever you want. And you want to talk about a crushing existential burden. You don't have to just choose your job. You have to choose your gender, your identity. I mean, it's an overwhelming burden that our society is putting on young people in an attempt to liberate them, and all it's doing is crushing a generation with anxiety.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Word Made Digital podcast. Thanks for checking out the video version of the podcast here on YouTube. Of course, we've got the audio version as well if you want to check that out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. But we really hope that these conversations week after week inspire you, connect with you, maybe stir something up in you or teach you something that you haven't heard before. We've got a whole archive of podcasts right here on the YouTube channel, as well as a ton of tutorials to equip you really practically as a communicator, as a leader in the church, and as a creative. So I encourage you to check that out. Subscribe if you haven't already. And thanks so much to the sponsors, Compassion Canada and the Church Go, for making this season of the podcast possible. Jon Tyson, welcome back to Word Made Digital. I'm glad to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much. It's great to be with you to talk about all things digital and also dogs. I'm loving this so far.
Yes, dogs and needy dogs that are humanized. I'm sure we could probably have a whole podcast just talking about, even in the context of your Intentional Father book, like what does it mean when people have dogs that are like their children and they call themselves a dog dad or a dog mom? They don't want to have real kids. They are
real kids. Please stop the discrimination.
Well, I'm learning this with a sick dog here in my house today. You go through probably similar feelings of helplessness. You want to help this poor little person who you don't know what's wrong, and maybe in Canada the difference is in Canada we have free healthcare for humans, but dogs cost a lot of money when they get sick.
Well, in New York City, there's no free healthcare, and dogs cost just as much money when they're sick. So
yeah. Well, hey, let's start here. How's New York? The big question maybe is New York dead? What's the new post-COVID New York like? Give us a scenario. Give us a lay of the land there.
Yes, half an hour ago I was in Harlem, and now I'm in Hell's Kitchen in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. New York is back. New York is back. I think foot traffic is still down 60% in the tourist areas, but it's back. I don't know what it's like in Canada. They require vaccinations to participate in the New York City social contract right now. So I was in Starbucks. Don't judge me. It was too early. There was no good coffee shops open. And in order to stay in the shop and drink my coffee, I had to show proof of vaccination and my ID that matched my card. Yep. So that's what, to drink coffee, that's where it's at. So I think it's maybe...
It's the same here. It's the same in our area right now as well. Yeah.
So it's like there's lots of people everywhere. The weather is just spectacular right now. Perfect fall weather. Almost peak foliage. So the city feels in many ways like it's coming back, I think. The schools are back in. There's still lots of closed stores, which is sad. I just walked past maybe 6 or 7 closed shops on one block. There's still a lot of restaurants that are closed from the pandemic and aren't opening back. But psychologically, New York is back.
And would you say we back? Would you say from even the anecdotal evidence in my own city, largest city in Canada, usually rated the most expensive city to live in. We in Vancouver fight for who's going to cost the most. But anecdotally, the cost of rents have gone way up, where a year ago you could get a really good deal on an apartment, and now it's bidding wars to get a crappy little place.
100%. It's fully back. Real estate market has totally recovered. The rental market has.
Yeah. Would you say maybe this is again like the microcosm of your own community, your own church people? Is it the same people, or did people leave but others have replaced them, as in some have left and new people have come?
We're back in person. We have been for a few months. We have 4 Sunday services, and we're at 50% attendance of what we were pre-COVID. So our church is half the size, which is pretty crazy. And I think 70% of the people I would say I've never seen in my life. Like, who are these people?
Huh. Oh,
and
interesting.
Everybody I know in New York saying that, it's like, wow, we've got so many new people. New York, on its best day, is a radically transient city. I mean, people are going all the time. They're coming, they're going, they're coming, they're going. I think the saddest thing is so many people left and never told me. Like, people didn't communicate their plans. And I put that on Twitter and a bunch of people bashed it. Like, well, you should know the size of your flock. I'm like, if you've got a church of 80, I appreciate that sentiment. That's not our situation. It's hard to know. So you're relying on community group leaders and layers of leadership. And our leaders are like saying the same thing. It's like, no, we didn't. People are, we just had some, in conservative parts of the US, people leave churches if you have to wear a mask. I've got people leaving church because we won't require vaccination. You know what I mean? It's like we're so on the opposite side of it. Though it's a lot of new people. My wife and I have just been saying to each other, there's so many new young folks to invest in with vision and faith. They're not jaded. They're not cynical. They're hungry. They're excited to be in New York. And we don't have the luxury in our leadership of letting our personal season dictate the needs of our people. So, trying to have enough in our tank to care and rebuild has been a challenge. But I think we're doing pretty well, all things considered.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because the tone all over, even just today, Jenny Allen, I saw her posting. She's hearing in her circles, like she posted something about leaders. A lot of us feel like quitting. We're tired. We're burnt out. We're frustrated. It's whether you require vaccines or don't, people are going to hate you. I mean, no matter where you fall on all of these issues, you're going to be mad at you, worn down, just, yeah. So what's the resilience then that, keeps you going?
I'm doing great. I'm embarrassed about how well I'm doing.
Huh, wow.
Tim Keller said something at the start of the pandemic, which I think about every day. He said, when Christians have a heroic response in crises, like we're at our best, the world has proved it's inefficient to love, serve, and care. Here we come. We're sharing our stuff, and he said, when 9/11 happened, all the people about 18 months later, all the people that had that initial heroic response were basically just burned out, and they all left. And so he was like, you gotta play the long game. And so I consciously played the long game. I gave a vision talk at the start of 2021 to our church. It was called Cause for Confidence, and it was out of the book of Jeremiah, where God says, cursed are those who rely on the flesh, but those who trust in me. It actually says, those whose confidence is in me will be like a tree planted by a river. And it's Psalm 1-ish, but it's just this whole thing on, you can choose the season of your soul even if you can't choose your circumstances. Dallas Willard talks about managing consciousness as the chief task of the Christian life, which is basically where we give our attention to, what we allow into our inner world. So I've spent a lot of time, close to 2 hours a day, consciously trying to enjoy God and tend to my heart. Just peace.
What does that look like? Can you give us
it's
not
meditating.
that it's prescriptive, but what is that?
Meditating
kind of
through small meditation, reading beautiful literature, poetry, nature, joy. Tending to the heart and filling it with beauty in the midst of all the brokenness, and doing things I love, and giving yourself permission to not be overwhelmed by every crisis for the moment. I'm trying to think about, not will I get through this, but how will I rebuild? That my whole time was not how do I get through this? It was how do I have enough energy to rebuild when we do get through it? And then how do I be here with a full heart 5 to 10 years from now? So if your thinking's like that, the way you respond to things in the moment is very, very measured. And I'm sure there's people who said, John, you underled, you didn't show enough empathy, but they're gone and I'm still here. And I don't say that in a bad way. It's kind of like, I'm trying, maybe I underled in a moment, but it's going to prove, hopefully, to 10 more years of faithful leadership. Maybe I didn't have enough empathy in the moment, but I didn't burn my heart out, and I'm not bitter. I'm still here with compassion and love. And the fundamental task of all leadership is leading yourself. No one else will lead you for you. Your responsibility is the condition of your heart. And I think, I may even sound kind of harsh when I'm saying it. This is just like what my mentors beat into me, my coaches. One of my coaches said to me is like, hey, like what if this is the start of the pandemic and not the end of it? Like, do you have capacity to lead through this for another 3 years? Like, what are you doing in terms of your habits and your heart to produce the kind of fruit that could say 3 more years of this, no problem, we'll be here. So I think I'm grateful to have so many voices speaking into me that are like highlighting that, and your sweet little dog is an example. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything. If you don't have your heart, you don't have anything. Doesn't matter how physically fit you are, how much money's in the bank. Like, if you lose your will to lead and follow Jesus, it's challenging. So yeah, I mean, I haven't always done it right, but I have prioritized like rhythms of renewal, like, Sabbath, like what I call the window of wonder. I know it's kind of cheesy, but I did it with my daughter. The window of wonder every day, where you consciously seek to cultivate love in your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So mine is 30 minutes per quadrant of joy.
Out of curiosity, is your Instagram part of this? Because if people follow you on Instagram, they'll see you post a lot of just, I would call it photojournalistic style imagery of your own city, artistic. You're noticing these little things around your city and posting them. Is that a spiritual exercise for you?
Oh, 100. Yeah, no, 100. That. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm not. Well, number one, Instagram was designed for photo sharing. People forget that. Now it's
well,
like
that's not what Instagram says anymore.
I
now
know
they
they just
a video ad.
I know they've just pivoted. They've pivoted because of economics and competition. TikTok's eating. They ate Snapchat up, and then TikTok ate up Instagram.
Yeah.
The future is TikTok. So it's like definitely. It's like I want to walk through the city slowly. I want to see people. I want to pay attention to beauty, to small things, to details. In every photo that I post, there's some small detail you're not paying attention to. It's not the person or the big thing. There's something else happening in there. Almost like a Where's Waldo? There's a Where's Waldo in all those pics.
Well, it sounds like a parable. Like you're trying to get people to look and listen.
Yeah. Well, it's Buechner. I mean, he says, what is art doing? Art is saying, stop, pay attention. When you put a frame around something, you can take most art outside of a gallery and put it on the sidewalk and you walk past it without even turning your head. But when you put a frame around it, you say, see, hear, listen. And I think that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to see God. I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to pay attention. I pray for all those people that I post. I try to imagine their whole story like, gosh, how did they get here? Where are they going tonight? What are their dreams? When they lay in bed at night and they're haunted by stuff, what is it? And honestly, it makes me love New York. There's a philosopher. There's a painter, and his whole sort of philosophy of painting was contrasting the burden of the individual against the city. And I've always sort of like loved that and adopted that as like, in one of the most densely populated cities on planet Earth, how do I isolate the individual story against the enormity of the background of the city itself, either a street or a skyscraper or vehicles or whatever that makes you, behold the person in the midst of the background. So it's rarely just like mass crowd shots,
Yeah.
Anyway,
I love
whatever.
that.
I love it. It is. It's therapeutic.
Well, I'll say that, I mean, at the very least, speaking of for myself, I appreciate it. It really makes me pause, actually, what you're posting. Not always, because we're all busy, but if I have a moment, sometimes I'm drawn in by what you're posting. And it's sometimes because I live in a similar urban environment. What am I seeing, or if I were to take a photo today, like Jon took a photo, what would I have taken a photo of, or what will I take a photo of? Whether I literally do or not, it's an interesting practice of looking.
Yes, so it actually came from, there was a book called Focal Practices, And it basically says in the modern world, we have to do practices that demand our presence. Living into focus is the name of the book. And it's like, how do we do these things called focal practices? And he says, you must engage in practices that you cannot be in control of. And so he actually advocates the number one practice as bird watching. And I was like,
I thought you were going to say, like, take some drugs or something.
No. Well,
for hallucinogens.
No, but someone said to me, "Hey, John, you are so fast paced. The rate at which you move through the world is violent, and you got to slow down. And you need a focal practice to enable you to do it." And he said, "You should try photography. It'll make you pay attention." And I got into it. My daughter really got into it, and now that's my goal, is to pay attention. If you look at Edward Hopper's work, and a lot of his stuff was done post World War II. I think his best work was done post World War II, and he's basically dealing with that post-war angst. And it is a bunch of, and he was like very unhappy in his marriage as well, sadly. But a lot of it is like finding the individual and then paying attention to them and making you ponder. And so that's a huge part of it. The other thing that Keller said to me in the early days here in New York was, he's like, you'd be surrounded by so much brokenness, you got to fill your heart with beauty. That's a discipline. And so what I'm honestly trying to do, like, do I have a goal in Instagram? A goal? No. But I do hope to trickle and drop little bits of beauty into people's day where they're like, oh man, that was, I saw somebody die, I saw violence, I saw war. Yeah, but I saw like the image of God in a person on the street, Wow. So I'm trying to do a little mini war in your feed for beauty.
You're talking around the idea of sort of your own formation, your own spiritual disciplines, and you're sort of nuancing how you're doing that in others. But I'd love to get more specific with you for a few minutes if we can, because I want to get some insight into what does discipleship look like for your community, or maybe the few guys or girls you're directly discipling. How are you passing this stuff off to others? Because I think usually Christians struggle with discipleship, because I think honestly a lot of us haven't been discipled well, so we don't know how to disciple other people well. I'm really grateful I had really formative discipleship in my particularly through InterVarsity at the time, through my university college years. It was hugely formative for me. As I was discipled, I feel more richly able to give it to others. So can you give us some flags in the ground or some things you're doing for discipleship?
Well, I mean, so I'm not looking for bonus points. Today's my birthday, okay?
It is?
So they just, yeah, it is. So they just did this sort of staff thing where the staff go around the room, and well, number one, you need to know my cake was a tray of cookies. There's a lot there. But the best cookies in New York from Culture Espresso.
Amazing.
But like people went around the word, and they were like, what's one thing that like people have sort of taken from you? Like what's a cherished memory over the course of the year? And I tell you what, there's everybody had two great themes, and it was so like encouraging, to be honest with you. And people are always saying nice things, so they're digging deep and blah blah blah. But there was two dominant themes, and they were, I'm constantly amazed at your capacity to find and share joy, and it has changed the way I view life. And then secondly, like your hunger for God, and you somehow have managed this like passionate intensity for God and childlike wonder about life itself. And those are the, like, my life is different because of these things. Like, these things are in my life now because of you. So, gosh, if it's more is caught than taught. And then, so, people will, like, give me some specific, like, they were like, well, share some your favorite memories of this. Yeah, and people would be like, hey, it was the small thing. It was like when we were driving in the car and we were watching a documentary and you pointed this out. Or it's like you stopped a song and then you replayed the chorus and explained why musically it was beautiful. And, so I guess I'm trying to spend time with people, and I'm trying to... Paul says, he talks about you like you know my belief, but he says you know my way of life. Paul says that to the Philippians, my way of life. And I think I'm trying to impart a way of life. I'm always trying to bring things together that normally repel each other in Christianity. I'm trying to bring, the contemplative and charismatic, the missional and the monastic. I'm trying to merge all of this stuff together because the beauty is on both sides of it, really. Our church has three pillars that everything's built around. We're trying to make missional disciples for the renewal of secular culture. It's our mission. And we're built on three pillars: tangible presence, counterformation, sacrificial mission. We think like living in the presence of God and awareness of the presence of God. It's why you were created. It's where you are headed. It is the thing that marks us out as distinct from all the other people on earth. God is with us. And then counterformation, which means we're moving out of the way of the world into the way of Jesus. So our deepest, truest self is like thinking, loving, and becoming more like Christ. And then we're moving out, stewarding what God's done in our lives for the sake of others. And I think all of our discipleship is built on those things, so each staff person would be working through like, how am I finding and encountering the presence of God? And then, where am I like Jesus? Discipleship begins in the place of confrontation. Where am I not like Jesus? That's where I start. And then, what's the thing that God's given me? And how am I stewarding that in the city? And I think those are the three things we talk around, program around, keep each other accountable around. And so you should be able to talk to any of my staff and get an answer from the question, what's God doing in your life right now? You should get an answer for like, what is God working on in your character, your formation right now? And you should be able to get an answer, here's where I'm engaged in renewing the city sacrificially. So yeah, it's like a constant, simple answer. And, it's like, it's one-on-one, it's the culture we create, it's the things we emphasize, it's what we talk about in retreats, it's some of the stuff we try and measure. Yes, those stuff.
So inevitably on a Word Made Digital podcast, we've got to talk digital, digital discipleship. I'm curious if you think those are, can those words coexist, discipleship and digital? And particularly curious about this, you and Tyler Preeb, another friend of mine, the Missional Life course, this sort of digital learning. Anyways, opening up that, I'd love to get your latest thinking on this, especially in this, post-COVID hybrid life we're living.
So do you have a copy of the Missional Life course? I'd be so happy to send it to you.
I don't have it.
Email me, I'll send it to you after this. Yep. You can see what we're trying to do with it. Look, the future is not your phone. The future is augmented reality. That's the next leap. It's mapping space, and it's going to go from looking at a screen into our hands to looking through the lenses on our face. That is the future. I have no doubt the future is augmented reality. You can hate that. You can yell at the tide, but the sea will come in. So we have to ask ourselves, how are we formed by the inevitable things our culture does to it, and to what degree do we engage, participate, resist, a nuanced response. But I simply say, if you're not doing discipleship with a cell phone in mind right now, you are literally making discipleship in another era of history. Like my wife and I had honestly almost a 3-hour discussion about this on the couch last night. We were like, okay, we're in our 40s. I guess the old Gen X boomer model was, let's build a church around our personalities as senior pastors and our teaching. And both of us are kind of like, I could not give less of a crap about that if I tried.
Say it again. Like, what was the old model? It was around the personalities.
Yeah, and preaching of the senior leaders. Yeah. And I was like, I want to be a wise, trusted voice in Christianity. I mean, like I want to be helpful, but I want to equip the next generation. I think where most people go wrong is they wait 10 to 15 years too late. By the time they hand it on, nobody wants it because they didn't get to shape it, and it doesn't match the future they're trying to create. So I say all that to say, our whole discussion was on if we're not doing, and this was our whole discussion was around software and hardware. And discipleship is software and hardware. The hardware is the local communities. And I'm very agnostic on that. And what I mean by this is like, hey, mega church, small church, house church, network church, congregational church, Presbyterian, whatever. Make your convictions work locally. But the software piece is the piece, or apps that work on anybody's system. That is going to be a huge part of discipleship. It's got downsides, which means that people can be consumptive of the disproportionate amount of available content. But it has an upside, which means you're not limited to the skills or maturity of your local leader. So again, I think it gets down to the vision of being a spiritual parent. Tutors are worried about other tutors stealing their students. That's an insecure pastor. Don't listen to them. You're going to listen to me. Fathers and mothers care about raising their kids to maturity, so they will take the best tutors possible to help their kids. And I think the future is probably going to be leaders curating the best voices that supplement their own local gifts and finding ways to have a hybrid of live relationships and digital content merged together. And I honestly can't wait to see how that works out through our smart glasses or whatever they end up being.
Well, you and I already wear glasses, so
Yes.
we're ahead of the game. We're already used to it. Have you tried them, by the way, as a sidebar? Have you tried the Google Glass or the
No,
the Facebook thing with the video camera that just came out within the last couple of weeks?
No, I tried the Snap glasses.
Oh yeah.
Snap had glasses.
Yes. I haven't tried any of them, but I'm curious about it.
So let me tell you. They will be the best thing and the worst thing. They will be such a gift and a complete and utter distraction. And so, like all things, it's like user beware and have caution. And again, it's the formative power. The question of formation is always, who am I becoming by what I'm doing? And so like putting something in front of my eyes that literally changes reality as I perceive it, it's going to shape me for good and for bad. You think... I think it's augmented reality. Virtual reality is probably a little too dystopian for the immediate future. But virtual reality may be disproportionately toxic. I heard an interview. I'm writing a book on sex, called Controversial Sex. And so I'm researching the chapter of pornography, which is like sort of a hard thing to say. I'm researching pornography. I have all the porn filters on all my devices and all the accountability. So I just need to put that out there. I have not looked at any pornography in my researching of pornography.
But I'm smiling because, it's like, how do you look it up without finding what you didn't want to find?
Yes.
That sounds like a hard Google search to do.
We can't, anyway, yes, it's a challenge. So I'm not looking for pornography. I'm looking for a philosophy of pornography. Mm-hmm. So I read an interview about a porn creator talking about what augmented reality is going to do to porn, how you can literally be in the room where the orgy is happening.
Wow.
And I was just like, oh gosh, what this is going to do to kids. Like what this is going to do. And I was actually trying to think, what's the positive godly formation you can pretend to be in a Bible scene? I was trying to think, what's
You're in the Chosen movie now?
Yeah,
or the TV show? You've joined the cast? Yeah.
Yeah, but on the theme of on the theme of technology, it's like we've got to go where the people are. I'm more convinced than ever that we have to be... and again, this is not my calling, but I'm like, I want to find 100 TikTok evangelists and fund them. You know what I mean? That's where young people are. And I don't want to know. I want to take the message to them in godly and redemptive ways. So here's a cool story. We had a girl, this is what our youth leader told us. We had a girl show up at our church who said, I became a Christian watching TikTok, and I Googled your church, and it's the closest church. And can you help me follow Jesus?
Wow.
So I think everybody who's opposed to technology should sit with that for a moment and realize the possibilities of that.
Well, you've mentioned Keller a few times. I was at a wedding a couple weeks ago. It was not a Christian wedding, just a regular wedding, whatever that means. And the MC referenced Tim Keller's book on marriage. So my ears perk up. I go speak to him, and long story short, he was a strong atheist. Realized, like, advocating for this way of life. Realized there were cracks in his thinking, didn't like that, went to YouTube. And he basically said to me at the wedding, this is a 35-year-old guy. In the last few years, he basically became a Christian on YouTube, watching people like Tim Keller and learning from them. And now he's brought his family to a local church in their area, and the story continues. But the story is so normal now. I think we need to tell them more and more these kinds of stories. I love that TikTok story. We want to get to your book, or at least your reference. Your art. I know the book cycles go. You're working on the next book. Well, I still want to talk to you about the book that I have in my hands, The Intentional Father. Practical Guide to Raise Sons of Courage and Character. So we're talking around, you've already brought those themes up. You're talking about what it means to be a mother or a father in the church who's looking for the best people, or best tutors for their kids, not a person who's trying to, be some sort of cult leader who keeps them all to themselves. And you're talking about themes of discipleship, talking about the next generation. So we've moved around these themes, but to be more specific, I know you've done a lot of research with Barna. Any stats that you want to bring up to the surface for us around just like what is going on for maybe specifically young men? I mean, even you've just mentioned the issues of pornography. What are some highlight stats that have caused you to want to write this kind of a book?
Well, primarily I wrote this book because I love my son. That's it. I had a son. I have a son. He's 21. His name's Nathan. And I just love him. I mean, I wanted to give my son what I didn't have. I wanted to help prepare him for the complexities of this crazy world and help him navigate like those wild, confusing teenage years. So I just basically designed a thing for my son based on a bunch of basically anthropological research, really. I mean, like where's the path? Like we're missing something. I feel it intuitively. All of my friends feel it. Like I'm missing it. And did a bunch of research and realized, well, the reason you're missing it is because it's missing. Like that deep internal archetypal longing, and that's there for a a
And you say that it's missing. You mean like the rites of passage? The path to becoming an adult in your society. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, James Hollis is a Jungian psychologist who's sort of one of the Rollheiser raw source guys. Says all societies have had a recognized universal 6-step process of forming young people into adults. Step 1, separation from the childhood environment. Number 2, death of childhood and initiation into adulthood. Number 3, process of formation that focuses on 3 areas. Number 1, the community's story, so they have a sense of belonging in history. The community's religion, so they have a sense of the transcendent. And then the roles required to help the community thrive. Then, after that happens, they're sent into what's called the ordeal, where they're pushed out, often on their own for extended periods of time in nature, to see whether or not they actually have learned these things and can depend on themselves. It's where confidence comes from in young people. Then they're recognized by the community and honored, and then they're reintegrated into society to participate and give leadership.
Wow. So
that is like, everybody did that but us. And so we even look at the fragments of formation. The typical kid today finds out about sex by Googling porn. Their lives are very fragmented between church, work, school, play, travel, sports. People are gone all over the time. There's no narrative. There's very rarely a sense of history. We don't live near often the places we grew up or extended family. We leave the home. We don't know when we're adults. We're never tested. And then, other institutions like Vie for Our Hearts. I dropped my daughter at school, Lee University. I'm so happy to be sending my money there. Wonderful school, man. They did it so well. I mean,
wow.
Standing ovation. But they used a phrase I was uncomfortable with. You're now a part of the Lee family. They use language like Lee will always be home. And they talk about the phrase, it's homecoming. And I was like, oh, it's sad that for most people, their deepest roots will not be in their families. They'll be in another institution. And it's not bad. They did an excellent job. In fact, it made me want to finish my doctorate and become a professor in a college and shape a generation. It was so good. But I was like, oh gosh. And then I was reading Buechner on the longing for home. And I was like, how many of us deeply in our spirits, when we reach out for that place of nurture and security and nostalgia, actually think of our families and our communities? And it's like almost none. And so you go like, oh, well, is that bad? What's the consequences of that? Well, researchers at NYU showed that helicopter parenting, which is really the end of sort of even existing rites of passage in modern society, ended at about 1990. Helicopter parenting started at 1990. This is when like the conscious break happened in American culture. And within one generation, the rates of anxiety and depression increased by over 80% in one generation. Because young people are now wandering around the wilderness of their experience. They don't know what to do with these energies that are very complex and confusing. Erotic energy, comparative energy, vocational energy. Trying to figure out who they're meant to be and how to do it. They've got a profound sense of ethical questioning and tension, and they're pushing boundaries. And if no one guides them, they try and self-initiate, and it's often chaotic and filled with regret. So it's no wonder then you've got people absolutely. And then on top of that, now what we're dealing with is we say to people, there is no path. You get to invent and be whoever you want. And you want to talk about a crushing existential burden. You don't have to just choose your job. You have to choose your gender, your identity. I mean, it's an overwhelming burden that our society is putting on young people in an attempt to liberate them, and all it's doing is crushing a generation with anxiety.
Wow. Yeah, I mean,
It's heavy, sorry.
The choice paralysis. No, I mean, yes. My mom, I think of her as a woman who she would often say she had three choices of what she could be: a nurse, a nurse, a teacher, or a secretary. Those were the three choices. And she and her two sisters, her and her sisters, they all chose one of those as their academic pursuit and, whatever. And so she's, of course, grateful that I have more opportunity than what was sort of obviously available to her in the 60s. But at the same time, I can resonate even with my own. It's long enough ago now. I'm in my 30s, but not so long ago that I had to make those kinds of major decisions of, you can be anything. And then, of course, people realize now you can't be anything. You're actually very bad at most things. You shouldn't do most things. We are hardwired a lot. Yeah. You can try and do anything. That's called an exercise in futility. Or you can try and figure out, who am I made to be? Is there a divine design to my life? And, as followers of Jesus, you find actually Christianity, when practiced properly, is like a pathway to liberation and freedom, not slavery and oppression. You get this profound sense of, this is who I am. I was made for this. I'm designed this way. There's a purpose behind me. The old classic, you're the poem of God. You're God's handiwork, created in advance for good works, which He's prepared in advance for you to do. And then it shifts from the existential dread of like inventing yourself to actually discovering the beautiful person God made you to be and the good things He has prepared for you to walk in. That's a little bit more of an adventure. It can still be overwhelming. Can still induce some anxiety, but knowing you're here on purpose and there's a thing designed for you to walk in, even if the path is unclear, it's good to know there is one. Yeah, that's right. Well, and there's this, the comment, it's becoming a bit it's not as fashionable to talk like the hashtag adulting, right? I mean, it was trending much more a few years back, but this idea of what it means to do it, people would post their, I don't know, paying their bills and saying hashtag adulting. But it was this meandering that people feel, I think, into their 30s now about, am I an adult? I don't feel like an adult. I still am trying to cling to my childhood lifestyle. I've seen even friends into their 40s, the financial decisions they're making are like their 21-year-old dude who's going to the bar every night still and not like a responsible adult, whatever that means. Like it's an interesting conversation that you're kind of raising the alarm bells around in culture and for the church.
Yes, well, I mean, so talking about Canada's most famous, maybe hated and loved controversial philosopher, Jordan Peterson. Okay.
I thought you were going to say Justin Bieber.
I'm a believer, so don't talk about him with disrespect. Please.
The philosophy of Bieber. I mean, because he had like a very troubled, move into adulthood.
There's all the liberals. They can't stand Jordan Peterson. But the question we have to ask is like, why does a Jordan Peterson exist? And he doesn't
why is
exist.
He so popular?
Yeah, and he's not here to defend the patriarchy as such, I don't think. He raises a question society is unwilling to talk about, and it's this. Its meaning comes from the acceptance of responsibility. Meaning comes from the acceptance of responsibility, and we live in a society where you don't have any really traditional responsibilities like you used to, and that's like and 12 rules for life, an antidote for chaos. You know who thrives in chaos? Predators thrive in chaos. And so it's I mean, there's so much research that basically shows human beings require some sort of order in order to function properly and thrive. And so, like, imposing order, like, we hate the renunciation of options, but in so doing, we get to impute meaning and we really find a sense of joy. And so I think, again, there's no... And again, I want to be clear, some of these were oppressive and needed to be removed or certainly expanded. Horizons of possibility needed to be expanded and opened up. People needed more options than they had available before. But we've so overdone it now that a lot of people are sort of floundering. There's sort of like a malaise. It's sort of like a failure to thrive. And, like almost 80% of the church I pastor is in their 20s. And I just see it more than ever. And, so I think, again,
and particularly,
the church,
I think, with young men.
Young men are struggling so badly right now. Yeah.
I mean, as a single woman, it means I have a lot of other single female friends, and I think what I would say is, it's not so much that I haven't been able to, find a partner that's compatible with me. It's I can barely think of a single guy I would recommend to a friend.
Okay.
And
hang on. Now you're getting into it. Now you're going to the place where everybody in my church goes all the time, which is, John, get your act together and give us better men.
Well, I mean, maybe, but I guess what my response often is I think it's a discipleship issue. It's I think I don't know what it is. I think maybe naturally, again, these are not my Barna-backed research studies, but just general observation, women are a bit quicker to have those relationships maybe with older women, or those discipling relationships. Maybe it's more acceptable for a woman to have that kind of, or they seek it out more naturally. I don't know what it is, but I don't see maybe that a lot of guys have been well discipled by older men. And so I've had, in my, this is maybe I'm getting too personal on the podcast, but people will say, "Oh, Joanna, you're so great, why are you single?" Or I don't know, well-meaning people who say something. And I'll usually say to these older guys, like, can you name a couple younger men, if it's an older man, can you name a couple younger men who you're discipling, who are becoming ready to be great partners. And like, of course, they have no one that they're discipling. And I'm like, well, and not that it's so different for women, but I'm speaking from my perspective. And I'm sad about it, and why I feel so hopeful then for what you're trying to do with things like the intentional father. How do we disciple and raise up young people into adulthood, and to take responsibility, and to have a sense of their spiritual life, their commitment to the community, etc. Maybe that was too much of a personal diversion from the real conversation.
No,
but
well,
I feel it in my own life, so it's an interesting.
No, that's exactly right.
To me.
If you feel it, you're going to have an audience that obviously likes you and resonates with you. And I think your experience is a very shared experience. I think there's like a sense of frustration and sadness. The frustration is like, what has gone wrong for a whole generation of young men? And I think, there's there can be a lot of sadness and frustration around that.
Yeah, and I hope. I mean, I hesitate and I'm stepping. Maybe I'm coming back on my own words, because I don't want it to sound like I'm angry, bitter, all those things that I fear now that people.
I don't think you do,
Joanna. It's actually a grief for my brothers. Because it's not so much even just like, maybe I'm never to be married, and that's fine. But even for my friends, I wish I knew a great guy who maybe had nothing for me, but was a great guy for you. I would love to introduce you to a great guy, but it is hard to find them. And I feel the grief for my brothers, that they haven't had the thing that you're talking about here, this development of their courage and character at the young age when they most needed it. I'm sad about that. So I'm grateful for what you're doing, is, the meandering way I'm trying to say it.
One life at a time. One life at a time.
I mean, maybe as one of the last questions here, how has this kind of conversation been received in your church community? It's maybe a bit of a filter or a sounding board for the, gender conversations, I think, are complex these days.
I would say, part of the challenge is our church is very, very young, because Manhattan is very, very young in general. So New York is amazing. It says if you're 21 or you have $21 million, there's no place like New York. It gets a lot harder, because I actually was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he's just gotten married, and he's in his 30s now, and he said it's amazing how little New York has to offer for someone in their 30s now. All of the motivational metrics disappear, because if the next stage is like, hey, maybe we should have kids, and it's like, why on earth would we want to have them here where it's so expensive and the schools are so challenging? And, it's kind of like, well, I guess this is why everybody leaves and goes and raises their kids elsewhere. He was feeling that. So my point is, we don't have a ton of teenagers in our church. Maybe, post-COVID, who knows? If our church is 1,000 people, 1,500 people, we have 20 kids, 25 kids. Teenagers.
Right, okay.
And the parents in our church are on it. They're doing an exceptional job.
Wow.
I would define. I'm thinking it's so small. I know all the parents, and I'm telling you, I would classify every parent in our church as an intentional parent.
Wow.
So I think that they all have this paradigm. And they're really built into it. So the larger conversation, I did a course before I put this book out called The Primal Path, and it's basically a lot of the content of the book came from that course. I've had almost 1,000 dads go through that course, so it's like a decent sample size now, and the appetite for it is staggering. Like I wish, it'll make me weep if I talk about it too much. I just wish you could see the feedback I get from dads and their sons. It's just the most encouraging, inspiring, life-altering stuff. I just show it to my wife with tears running down my cheeks, like, I can't believe this dad in South Africa is building this relationship with his kid because, I threw together this course. Whoever would have thought? But the appetite for it is huge.
Yeah, what are they hungry for? If you could use a few words, like they want connection with their kid and they didn't know how to talk to them, or what are some of those things that, like when you're hearing the feedback, it's what is the puzzle piece?
It is mainly I am stopping generational brokenness flowing into my son.
Wow.
Like I'm damming up the brokenness and releasing a new kind of blessing. And like I think one of the, like someone said to me recently, what's the greatest pain you've ever received in your life? Man, I've been slandered, criticized as a pastor. My wife has wounded me in very, very deep ways. But nope, I've never experienced pain deeper than my children's rebellion. My heart has never been so wounded. You find out your kids are doing crazy stuff. You just want to vomit. You have a physical reaction. So when you realize I am helping my kids have a better future than I did, and I'm not talking materially, but necessarily, I'm talking about character and vision and love and boundaries and frameworks and understanding, and there's nothing as rich and exhilarating, and both my kids sent me messages for my birthday today, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe these words are coming out of my children's mouth.
Wow.
Like I don't know what I've gotten right in my life. I don't know what I'll do next. I don't know what mistakes I'll make, but I've got 2 kids who genuinely love me, and I'm like, gosh, it's almost enough. So I think there's some profound thing in a heart that longs for a father's blessing. And fathers, I think, long to give the best of themselves to their kids. Jung says all wounds come from 2 main areas in our childhood. We're not nurtured properly, or we're not protected properly. And so, that's about attachment issues and control issues later in life. And if we can nurture our kids and protect them so that when they're older, they can form healthy relationships and they can face the world with confidence because they're not afraid of everything. I mean, that's what parents want to do. So yeah, it's touching a nerve. I'll tell you this: you're the first interview I think I've done, and I don't think we've sort of gotten into many of the details, but the interviews, like when we're talking about what happened, they normally end in tears. Like I'm crying, the person interviews crying. It's because there's something it's a nerve of the soul to have an adult love you and bless you and identify your gifts and call you into the future and challenge you. It does something like very few other things in life can do, So yeah, we need to talk about it more, and hopefully this helps people. Like my goal is to be helpful, and it was kind of weird because, the way I work is I'm sort of like a practical theologian. Like I get into something, I read as much as I can on it, I summarize it into a tool, and then I move on. And I'm like, hey, my kids are both in university. I'm over this. But I kind of felt like God was like, there's a bit of a need here, so stay on this theme for a while. And that's ultimately why I wrote it. It touches some deep part of the human heart. Yeah.
Well, and, for those who are spiritual parents, not parents, people who don't have their own children, but want to raise up the next generation, I think there are some markers here as well. I think for even I think of the youth pastor to read this book or to consider these concepts of the rites of passage, not that the institution can replace a father, but if it's not happening there, or how can the local church help the parents, the single mom, the dad who's trying to figure it out, never had this for themselves, how can we help them to do this? And what I love is that what you're talking about too is even if you didn't necessarily receive this yourself, actually can stop there. And you can give this to the next gen.
The gift the church has that a lot of people forget about. So the book's called The Intentional Father, but really it's about an intentional community of people rallying around parents to raise their kids in partnership.
Yeah.
The dream scenario is like a campus ministry and a student ministry and a church and an extended family. That sort of web and integrated relationships. People in our culture don't have access to that very much. They don't have a conscious community of people geared around a common vision. So the church really has an opportunity to help love our kids differently and distinctly, and also to reach out to others who don't have this and welcome them in, to provide, to fill in some of those gaps. So I'm basically talking about like a tribe of dads, a council of dads, not just like the pressure's not all on like one dad, like I got to get it right or I'm screwing my kid up. It's like, no, we're all going to screw our kids up anyway. It's like, it happens. But
Save
B,
money now for their future therapy.
Totally. And then B, it's like realize it's a community effort, and there's such a role that people can play. I've got a whole chapter on like finding mentors to give your kids what you can't give them.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of the church.
Well, I have these vivid memories. I'm the youngest of a large family, and so I was the last at home. Maybe that means I got a little more attention than in a big family. Maybe the older ones couldn't have as much attention as I could get by the time I was the only one at home in the end. But I can remember in high school, like a youth leader would come and pick me up from the house in the suburbs, before I could drive or whatever. And I remember distinctly these moments my dad or my mom would pass a $20 bill into their hand just to say like, hey, you're hanging out with my kid, and I know it costs time and money to hang out with my kid. We can't do this without you. $20 bill
good.
of, $20 doesn't pay for what they're actually doing, but it's a gesture, right?
Yeah, I love that.
And that they did it in front of me. I needed to see that, to know that it was like it was a community of people who were supporting one another and in agreement about that. Just as we could have this conversation for a long time. There's lots of things we could go into here, but just to wrap up, you're talking about courage and character. We've seen a lot of the lack of that in ourselves. We know it in ourselves, and we know it in the stories of the implosion of public leaders around us. Just if you have a pastoral word for us as we end around, you've said so much in this conversation around how you're doing that, how you're doing your own spiritual formation and how you're trying to offer it to others, but just a pastoral word as we're trying to do this journey, those who are listening, to more courage and more character for ourselves and those around us. How do you want to leave us?
Well, I think I'd try and leave like what Jesus says. In this world you will have many troubles, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And so it's sort of like that tragic optimism. It's like, hey, it's big there. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid. And I would just say, God's commitment to shaping you and walking with you is so far greater than your commitment to him. Don't draw your metrics on your faithfulness. Draw them on God's faithfulness. Jesus never says, remain in how you feel about me. He says, remain in how I feel about you. Remain in my love for you. So Jesus says, I will be with you always. I'll never leave you or forsake you. And so I would just encourage people, take heart, because he is with you and he is for you, and he's working in you through the Holy Spirit. He's working around you through your experiences. He's working in the church to shape you and to form you. He's gifted you with supernatural gifts. He's wired your personality a certain way. And be kind to yourself. Rely on the love of God and just be faithful over the course of time. He will work these things together for good no matter how dark the season. So just take heart and keep going.
Jon Tyson, birthday boy, thank you so much
for
being with us. It's a
great
joy.
to chat.